Bienvenidos and welcome to the Familia FFB podcast. I'm Jorge Martin, your host, and today we are going to South Florida, Miami. Vamos a Miami. We're tackling the Miami Dolphins today. We are joined by el invitado muy estimado, Alain Poupart of Sports Illustrated. We've been talking a little bit right now, and we thought, we wanted to keep the energy going and just to jump into the interview. Alan, thank you so much for joining us. I know you've got your Expos cap, so I know you're north of the border. So this is the Great White North meeting south of the border. So we're meeting in the middle. But bienvenido, bienvenue. Did I say it correctly?
Well done.
Thank you for joining us. Muchas gracias for joining us.
No, my pleasure. And as Will Smith once said in his song, Bienvenidos a Miami.
Well, and actually everything has been muy bien with the Dolphins in the last year. I mean, you've seen a regime change. You've not only from the coaching staff with Brian Flores, but also on general manager. We're going to year two with a new quarterback. Can you characterize kind of how the jump has happened in this with this organization? And really, I mean, going from a team that was a top, one of the first number 5 pick in the draft to knocking on the doors of the playoffs last year.
Well, you got a group. Let's remember, Brian Flores was hired in February of 2019 after helping the Patriots win another Super Bowl title. And then he teamed up with Chris Greer, who had been the GM in title for a while, but with some question as to exactly what his role was, what kind of authority he had. And then it's been those two pretty much as a tandem since then, and they clearly had a plan from the time they joined forces, which was to wipe the slate clean, get rid of bad contracts, clear up a lot of salary cap space, accumulate draft picks, and build something that could be consistent, sustainable, and have the Dolphins in contention year in and year out. After getting rid of a whole lot of players to accomplish those goals in 2019, the idea was that they were going to be terrible, and that was going to be a price they'd have to pay. And those first 4 weeks of that 19 season, if we remember, was just catastrophic. They got outscored. I remember the numbers. I think it was like 41-5 or something was the average score of those first 4 games. But lo and behold, the coaching took in, the team got better, and at the end of the year, they won five of their last 9, including that big-time upset of the Patriots in the finale at Gillette Stadium. And then we went into last year after a major offseason shopping spree with the idea that the team could be better. We didn't know exactly how much better they were going to be. We already knew that Brian Flores could coach, because squeezing 5 wins out of that roster in 2019, that was a pretty impressive work. And then last year, lo and behold, a lot of good things happened. The offense makes plays here and there. The defense is just lights out in creating turnovers. The special teams are about as good as you can get. And lo and behold, they're in playoff contention and in control of their playoff fate heading into the season finale at Buffalo. And that game served as a reminder that, yes, the Dolphins came a long way in 2020, but there's still work to be done, because Buffalo clearly showed that they were much better than the Dolphins at that stage. So the question now is whether they can take another step forward in 2021, but that's going to require the defense being able to duplicate or top what it did last year, which is not going to be an easy feat. And then the offense is going to probably have to pull more of its weight, and that puts the onus on Tua Tagovailoa, the 5th overall pick of that 2020 NFL draft.
And let's start with him. We talked offline. I told you about my idolatry, adulation for Dan Marino. And Dan Marino was, to me, was the gold standard for the quarterback who makes the jump in the second year. That 5,000-yard, 48 touchdown season in 1984 is still one of the all-time great seasons of all, in NFL history. I know that his shadow has been big for anybody who's followed in his footsteps, Tua being one of them. and there was some talk, in the off season, even during the season, that I could see some Twitter chatter of of the Dolphins even, possibly moving on. They're not moving on. They're definitely putting everything behind him. What kind of, and there's been a lot of scrutiny about him, in training, in OTAs and minicamp, the 5 interception game being one of them. But what can we look for in this season as far as progression from his 2020 season?
Well, that's the great question, and that's the biggest question that's facing this team in the early stages of training camp, because you mentioned Dan Marino and the big jump in the second year. But here's the thing that needs to be mentioned, and it's a big difference between Dan Marino and Tua Tagovailoa. And it's not fair to compare the kid to Dan Marino, who is an all-timer. But the thing is Dan Marino made the Pro Bowl as a rookie in 1983. And talk to people who covered the team back then, which I've done, and they will tell you that the very first practice you saw Dan Marino throw a football, and they were like, oh yeah, that's a guy right there. And quite frankly, I never had that moment. I saw all of the Dolphin practices that were open to the media in training camp, and then I saw him through all of his appearances during the regular season, and I'm still waiting for that wow moment where I tell myself, and it registers that, yeah, this is a franchise quarterback. Now, I'm not saying that he can't get there, because we don't know. But the thing is, that the point is exactly, we do not know. And that's why you saw and all the speculation on Twitter or stories or analyses wherever you looked in the offseason, where if the Dolphins had the chance to bring in an established, bona fide, legit franchise quarterback, that they would consider it, because Tua might or might not become that guy. And if you had a chance, before all of the legal issues with Deshaun Watson surfaced, well, making a move for Deshaun Watson made perfect sense, because you're looking at a 25-year-old who is a bona fide franchise quarterback. And again, we don't know what Tua is going to be as far as his NFL career is concerned. Logic will tell you that this is his second year. He's another year removed from the hip injury. He's got more explosive wide receivers at his disposal. He's going to be more familiar with the offense. He's the guy right now, as opposed to having Ryan Fitzpatrick looking over his shoulder. So by all logic, he should be better in 2021 than he was as a rookie in 2020. The question is, how much better will he be? And how much better can he ultimately get, if not in 2021 and in 2022?
Where did you see the biggest areas for improvement with him? And we'll get into the receiving core in a bit, but is this kind of a scheme that kind of fits what he did at Alabama?
Well, what he did at Alabama is, if we're going to be honest, he had the benefit of 4 wide receivers who ended up being first-round picks in the NFL, the best offensive line in college football, which was a borderline NFL offensive line, and Najee Harris as a running back. And what it required of the quarterback in that offense at Alabama, that star-studded offense, was somebody who could be an orchestrator, a facilitator, who just needed to get the ball quickly to those guys and let them work their magic. And in the NFL, the idea that your wide receivers are going to be open by 3 or 4 yards every time they run a route, that's just not realistic. What the Dolphins are going to be doing in 2021, again, logically speaking, with the speed they added with Will Fuller V, with Jalen Waddle, Tagovailoa's former teammate at Alabama, and even with Albert Wilson back after opting out with COVID because of the COVID situation last year, well, that's 3 faster guys than anybody else in the wide receiver core last year for the Dolphins. So I think the logic says you can expect a whole lot of quick passing, short throws, bubble screens, quick slants. And where Tua needs to make his money is very quick decision-making, accurate passing on those short throws, where if he's leading Jalen Waddle on a slant and Jalen Waddle happens to have, even if it's half a step on the defender, if he's hit in stride with that speed, he can easily outrun many defensive backs in the NFL. He's just that fast. So if we're looking at the areas where Tua can improve, his game, it needs to be based on, again, quick rhythm passing. Because if we're being honest with ourselves, he's not Justin Herbert. And I hate to bring his name in because he was the guy picked right after. But let's be honest, Justin Herbert is 6'6" and got a gun for an arm, and he can make all kinds of throws on the move with major zip on his passes. And Tua's just not that kind of guy. Tua is about 6 feet. The arm is okay, but average at best. So it needs to be very precision stuff. The comparison to Tua always has been the best case scenario is he becomes Drew Brees. For that to happen, though, is all the intangible stuff, knowing the offense like the back of his hand, anticipation, the accuracy all the time has to come together, and that's what he needs to do. One big issue I can tell you last year with Tua was his reluctance to throw into coverage, something that he himself admitted. There were a lot of fans who were suggesting that he was held back because of the offense. Well, the kid himself said in press conferences he wasn't necessarily comfortable throwing contested balls. The makeup of the wide receiver core last year, you had guys like Devontae Parker, Mike Gesicki, Preston Williams, whose best work comes when they're barely open and you throw them a ball and they'll make the play beating the defender. That doesn't necessarily play into Tua's strengths. Now he's got wide receivers who are much better suited to help him in what he does best, again, which would be the accurate short to intermediate passing.
Last question on Tua. The hip injury was obviously worrisome. He's almost 2 years out from that. Running was never a big part, and in fantasy football we do like to see running quarterbacks to do some running. Is he going to be more kind of like, the occasional scramble kind of guy, barely get the first down, rather than obviously he's not going to be like a Lamar Jackson or a Kyler Murray, but can his legs become a factor this season?
In terms of maybe avoiding pressure, but I don't think if you're going to be necessarily looking at a lot of naked bootlegs where they run off of that. Just if we want to stay with the Dolphins, Ryan Tannehill was a much better runner than Tua is. So I don't think that's going to be a major part of what the Dolphins do. What they do want to do, they did a lot last year. I would expect them to do again this year, is an awful lot of rollouts off of fake handoff, where Tua is rolling to his left, where he does throw with accuracy in those situations, and that plays to his benefit. He had a couple of nice scrambles last year. There was certainly a couple against Arizona that really stand out, but that's not necessarily a big part of his game, as you mentioned, and I would not expect it to be a major factor this year. I think the focus this year is going to be on the speedy wide receivers they brought in.
Well, you know what? Before we get to the running back, we'll put the running backs to the side. Let's talk about those speedy wide receivers. Obviously, you talked about Will Fuller coming in free agency. Obviously, he's going to miss the first game of the season with the suspension. You got Jalen Waddle, former teammate, so you got to hope that there's some sort of chemistry there. Holdovers are Devontae Parker, Preston Williams, Albert Wilson. You mentioned coming back. How do you see the targets kind of being broken up, and who might be, will any of them be players who receive north of 100 targets this season?
Yeah, I wouldn't think so. I think what the Dolphins like in their wide receiver core is they have balance. They have a lot of choices where they want to go with the ball. With all the guys you mentioned, and there's some duplication in terms of the skills, because especially if you're looking at Wilson and Waddle, would be more like slot type guys. And I mentioned bubble screens and quick slants earlier, and then let's not forget about the old shovel pass, where you'll see one guy come in motion, and then Tua's just going to go, whoops, there you go, to make use of that speed. So my best guess, I think Waddle, because, again, obviously it's going to depend on who stays healthy, but because they picked him 6th overall, and because he's such a dynamic player, and if you look back at last year, look at the first 4 games that Alabama played last year, the one with the best receiving numbers wasn't Devontae Smith, who won the Heisman. It was Jalen Waddle, who was on track to have an insane year, the kind of year that Devontae Smith wound up putting, and then he got hurt. So my expectation is if everybody stays healthy, Waddle probably gets the most touches at wide receiver, but the idea that that he racks up the kind of volume that, let's say, a Stephon Diggs in Buffalo, or even a Justin Jefferson with the Vikings as he did last year as a rookie. I just don't see that happening. Now, of course, if somebody gets hurt, then necessity becomes an issue. But I think, again, if everybody stays healthy, I do think Waddle would get the most touches, but I don't think it's going to be in the 100 range.
You mentioned health a little bit. I wanted to ask about Waddle. Does he look full steam ahead? That the ankle injury looks like it's
you're going to ask me about the limp, right? Look, we've had a fun debate with the media, and I didn't see a limp at all. He got kind of a funny way of walking, maybe like a little stutter step when he walks, but every route he ran in the spring, even though it's not like full blast game speed, he looked perfectly fine to me. Then he shows his workout videos. And does anybody notice anything resembling a limp? And then furthermore, here's my final thought on this. If he had any sort of issue with his ankle, a wide receiver you selected 6th overall because of his speed, do you think for a second there would be any chance taken of aggravating it so where he could be a factor in training camp or worse in the regular season? I don't buy it. I know it's been out there for a couple of places that he had a limp. Sorry, I didn't see it. Not a factor in the league remotely, as far as I'm concerned.
And you know what? Sometimes speed guys, they just have a way of walking. I mean, look, Miami native Juan Pierre from the baseball side. As I told you, I used to work for the Dodgers. I got to see him up close and personal. One of the fastest people I've ever seen. He walked. He did not walk like. He walked. He took his time, and sometimes it looked like there might be a little bit of a limp in there. But when he got on the base paths, there was no problem. So I'm not. I wanted you to shed light. Devontae Parker being on the PUP list, is that sound like it could be a lingering thing? It's always worrisome when somebody starts the year injured, starts training camp injured.
Yeah, but all indications that it's not serious. But again, I hate to be that guy, but just the fact that he starts on PUP, given his injury history, it's pretty easy to go, oh, here we go again. Because you're looking at a guy who's been in the NFL since 2015. He's had 1 year where he's played all 16 games. And in that 1 year, he was awesome. If you look at his numbers, fantasy numbers, AFC wide receivers, number 1 in receiving yards, number 1 in receiving touchdowns. I mean, he was lights out. But then last year we went back. I don't remember the number of games he played. It might have been 14 games he played last year, so he didn't miss a lot of time. But he wasn't 100% on a couple of other occasions, or he had games cut short where he wasn't nearly the factor he was 2 years ago. So you go into another training camp. He starts off on PUP, even though the suggestion is it's not terribly serious. Again, it's very easy to go, here we go again.
No, it's always a concern, and hopefully, I mean, I have him on a dynasty team, so I'd like to see him do well.
He's very frustrating. I mean, fantasy or regular football, it's very frustrating because you see what he can do, and he admitted a couple of years ago, like in an interview, that there was an issue with maybe not taking care of his body properly. A couple of other issues. It's just bad luck, and it's just. But then again, one could make the argument he had a major injury at Louisville before the Dolphins drafted him. So.
No, exactly, and you mentioned that 2019 season. He won a lot of people their leagues. I mean, the way he finished that season, he was spectacular, absolutely spectacular. Let's jump to the running backs. I think a lot of people expected that the Dolphins were going to be in the running back market in the NFL draft, and they didn't go shopping. They went other directions. Myles Gaskin is the incumbent. Obviously, he was limited. He missed some games because of injury last year. What is and there's Malcolm Brown and Salvon Ahmed. Those seem to be the touch leaders, obviously rushes and targets. how do you see kind of like this backfield breaking down?
It's a good question. I think it's Myles Gaskin's show. I'm not sure if they go feature back and he gets 80% of the touches at running back.
Mm-hmm.
The thing with the Dolphins, and again, we have to remember Brian Flores comes from the Patriots, who generally speaking avoided making high draft pick investments into running backs, which may suggest, because it's not only this year that the Dolphins really could have used a running back in an early round, but it's also last year when, remember, they had 5 picks in the first 2 rounds. There were 6 guys who wound up being taken in those first 2 rounds, and all of them showed signs last year as rookies of being really good players. I mean, you're looking at Edwards-Helaire, DeAndre Swift, J.K. Dobbins, A.J. Dillon, Cam Akers, and I forget the 6 right now, but all of them. Jonathan Taylor actually might have been the best of the bunch. So nobody can tell me that any one of those guys would have really looked good in the Dolphin offense. But and again, they did the same thing this year. There were 3 guys this year that stood out with Harris, Etienne, and Javonte Williams, and the Dolphins bypassed all of them. And then after the draft, you had Chris Greer, the GM, telling you that he feels very confident what they had at running back, which obviously goes with the fact that they didn't draft one, because if they didn't feel confident with the running backs, they would have picked one. Myles Gaskin's an interesting story, 2019 7th-round pick, who was insanely productive at Washington, but just doesn't have anything that jumps out at you. He's not particularly fast. He's not particularly big. He's not particularly jukey, but he works his butt off. He's tough, and he gets the job done. And last year he was very productive in those 10 games he played. The one thing with him, the yards per carry average was 4.1, which is okay, not great, but how much of that is the work of the offensive line? Although, if I remember correctly, his advanced stats show not much in terms of breaking tackles. So I like Gaskin. He's a nice player. If I'm coaching a team or GM of a team, I think I'd probably prefer having a more dynamic running back as my number one. But this seems to be the way the Dolphins want to go. Going back to your original question, I would think they would use all 3 guys. They have others on the roster. Jordan Scarlett's a guy who actually I like the way he moved during the spring practices that were open to the media. But again, let's wait until the pads come on to see exactly what we got there. I didn't see a whole lot from the 7th-round pick, Jared Dokes, that excited me. What I did see, and again, it was a very, very brief sample, I saw somebody who fought the ball every time they were throwing it to him. So that could be an issue. So, yeah, I would think Gaskin would get the most of the touches. I mean, he'd be a good, if I'm advising somebody in fantasy football, maybe a later round pick. I don't think he'd be necessarily an early round pick.
Yeah, he's going in kind of like that range among the last 10 running backs who can be seen as receiving the most touches on their teams, just because there's that uncertainty with him. And one of the things that I remember, being a Ram fan, and seeing all the Ram games, Malcolm Brown did get a lot of work around the end zone. So I guess, I guess that could be kind of a little bit of a factor there too. Let's jump over to the tight ends. Mike Gesicki has really, people talk about his athleticism, his talent, and it just hasn't materialized on the field consistently. I mean, there've been breakout games and then games where he disappears. What is kind of his outlook for this season? And obviously there's also Hunter Long, who's the rookie tight end.
Well, they've got quite an interesting situation at tight end, and I hate to take a very long roundabout way of answering your question, but they had their top 3 guys at tight end from last year are back. Gesicki, Durham Smythe, who's the blocking specialist of the group, and who's a dependable pass catcher, but he won't get you anything more than usually 5-yard gains or 7-yard gains. And then they had Adam Shaheen, who they acquired in a trade from the Bears last summer, and then liked enough that they signed to a 3-year contract extension. So those 3 guys are back. Then they went out and signed Seaton Carter from the Bengals, who's a guy who comes in as a tight end / H-back / special teams mainstay type of guy. So that's 4 already. And then they go out and they take Hunter Long in the 3rd round of the draft. So that's 5 tight ends. I can't remember covering many teams that had 5 tight ends on the active roster. And then you add to that the fact that both Smythe and Gesicki are scheduled to be unrestricted free agents next offseason. They haven't signed either one of them to an extension. They signed Jason Sanders, who was in the same boat, and Jerome Baker was in the same boat, but neither of the 2 tight ends. I can't help but think that the addition of Long means they're not re-signing one of those guys or either of those guys. So exactly how the playing time is going to be divvied up this year, I can tell you the Hunter Long moves very well. So I can certainly see him being a factor in the passing game, even as a rookie, even though it takes time for tight ends to develop. I could see him being a factor. The other issue with Mike Gesicki is he lined up an awful lot in the slot last year when the Dolphins didn't have a great slot receiver. Well, now they got Jalen Waddle, who we talked about before, and they got Albert Wilson. So the number of times where Mike Gesicki is going to be in the slot might be diminished. And again, maybe if we're looking at Mike Gesicki, what does he do best? It's not creating separation. It's winning one-on-one battles on contested balls. Who is the ideal quarterback for that? Well, Ryan Fitzpatrick. It wasn't Tua Tagovailoa. So I would advise anybody thinking of taking Mike Gesicki in a fantasy draft to proceed with caution.
Oh, awesome. I love the candor. I love that you're being so definitive, and I so appreciate that. That's awesome. I also like that.
Totally off base in anything I'm saying, but this is the way I see it. So that's the way I'm going to call it.
And that's why I'm doing this series, because I'm not in Miami, and I want to have somebody who's got eyes on these people and is going to make an unbiased opinion. And so that's why I love doing this series and being able to talk to people. I mean, I love getting that feel of the teams. We've started talking with people in OTAs and mini camp, and now we're in at the beginning stages of training camp. So no, this is awesome. I so appreciate this. And I want to ask a little bit about the offensive line. I always ask a question about the offensive line. This is a young group. There's been a lot of draft picks that have been invested in this group. Pro Football Focus has them ranked number 29 going into the season this year. But because of the youth, is this a group that could could kind of mold together and become an improved unit on this team?
Yeah, no question. And again, this goes back to you got 3 of them who were 2020 draft picks who logically should be better in year 2. Question is, how much better will they be? Because if we look at last year, I can tell you Robert Hunt to me looked like a guy who's going to be a stud in the NFL. Played right tackle last year. It looks like he's going to wind up moving inside to right guard this year. And now they have a big question mark at right tackle. And one of the possibilities is a rookie, their 2nd round pick, or one of their 2 2nd-round picks, Liam Eichenberg from Notre Dame, who by all accounts was deemed to be maybe the most NFL-ready offensive lineman in the draft. But I talked to my SI colleague who runs the Notre Dame site, who's watched him for 4 years, and basically what he told me is absolutely NFL ready, could start tomorrow. But if you're looking at a ceiling, this is not Ronnie Stanley, Zach Martin, trying to think of it, Quentin Nelson, the other top-end Notre Dame offensive lineman that the school has produced in recent years. That he can become a good, solid, effective NFL offensive lineman, not a stud, but could be ready early. So how good can the offensive line be? Well, it's going to depend on how well Hunt develops. If Eichenberg does wind up in the starting lineup, how good can he be? Their left tackle is going to be Austin Jackson, one of their 3 first-round picks in 2020, who had his moments, but was kind of spotty in his play as a rookie. Logically, he should be better. There's a question mark at center. They signed Ted Karras in free agency last year, signed him to a 1-year deal. He went back to New England, so they signed Matt Skura, who started for Baltimore, did some good work for a few years, really bad knee injury in November 2019. Word out of Baltimore, it was a miracle that he got himself ready for the start of training camp last summer, but it took him a while to get back to his form. Wasn't quite the same kind of player. Then had an issue with shotgun snaps. And now, as we're looking here, we're looking at these Dolphins. I couldn't tell you for sure that it's going to be Skur at center, so that's a question mark area. So, yeah, the ranking of 29th at this point, it's really hard to argue against it. But I will say it's still a lot better than it was in 2019 when that offensive line was just not good.
I remember watching some games, and it was just like I felt bad for Fitzmagic. It was tough for him. Last football question: you got the on the defensive side. Obviously, there's the Xavier Howard talk about requesting a trade. This was a group that really took a big step forward last year. It seemed to be a group that was built from the back end forward. Can you give me some of the strengths? Is this gonna be another team, a team that's going to be strong against the run, against the pass, against both? How do you see the defense shaking up for those people who want to have players going up against the Dolphins in upcoming weeks?
Yeah, that's a very tough question to answer, and I will tell you this: it's because of the Xavier Howard situation. Because so much of what they do, and you hit it on the head, it's a defense that's built from the back end up, and the ability to have Xavier Howard on one side, Byron Jones on the other, lockdown guys, allowed them the freedom to do a lot of funky things at the line of scrimmage to create confusion for opponents. And one of the teams that they confused the most last year was your Rams. If you recall, biggest play of the game might have been the Emmanuel Ogbah sack, forced fumble that was returned for a touchdown when he came in unblocked from basically a defensive end position. I mean, how confused do you have to be to leave that guy completely unblocked? And then the Rams actually figured it out after a while and made a game of it in the end, but they couldn't catch up. And then there's another game against the Chargers where both Keenan Allen after the game was saying they had us completely confused. I had never seen or heard an offensive player in the NFL admit to such confusion after a game. It was crazy. But now there's the big cloud hanging over the Dolphins because of this Xavier Howard situation where he went on Instagram and requested a trade. If they don't have him, man, that changes that dynamic big time, because now who starts opposite Byron Jones? The most likely candidate right now probably would be Noah Benogany, who is the third of their 3 first-round picks, but who looked like into 2020 in the brief appearances he had early in the season when Jones was out, like a kid who was out of his league, no pun intended. And I know the Dolphins are very high on his potential because he's got some major athletic ability, but he's relatively new at the cornerback position because he started at Auburn as a wide receiver. So who knows how long it's going to take him to get up to speed and become like a top-notch NFL cornerback, assuming he does. And certainly wouldn't be an Xavier Howard early on. And then the idea is if the Dolphins do decide that they can't deal with having an unhappy player and they do not want to budge on Xavier Howard's contract, and if they want to trading him for a player, well, it's kind of hard to imagine another team acquiring Xavier Howard in the trade and then sending back another cornerback. So logically, if they do trade Xavier Howard for a player, it's not going to be a cornerback, and then we're going to have that major question mark. And how much does that limit what the Dolphins want to do? Because in terms of their pass rushers, the guys who led the team in sacks last year were Emmanuel Ogbah, who came over from the Chiefs, and like almost doubled his previous career high in sacks. And I mentioned Gesicki and Smythe being pending unrestricted free agents. Well, Ogbah's another one of those. And the Dolphins have yet to sign him to an extension, almost thinking, okay, let's see if you can do it again. Because maybe there's a feeling that it was a lightning in a bottle type of thing, and he's not going to be able to duplicate what he did last year. And then the other one was Jerome Baker, the linebacker, who had 7 with some really well-timed blitzes. Well, part of what enabled those blitzes was the coverage in the back end. So, yeah, until that Xavier Howard situation is settled in a positive way, the Dolphins are a dangerous team for anybody to pick as a defense. But it could be an advantageous matchup for opposing offenses facing them, because they did give up a lot of yards last year. They were 20th in the NFL in yards allowed. Where they made their living was in creating turnovers. So, and how that's going to play out, it's been an all off season. The Dolphins haven't budged on moving off of Howard's contract, which we need to say it was an extension he signed in May of 2019. It's got 4 years left. So can understand from their standpoint, listen, you got to play out your deal, or at least get closer to the end of it before we talk, redoing the deal. And so that's a little bit tough to see. And it's also a little tough to see Xavier Howard all of a sudden deciding, you know what, no, I don't want to be traded after you go on Instagram and put out the kind of message he did. So that's a messy situation, and it's going to create a lot of uncertainty about this Miami Dolphins defense until it's resolved one way or another.
Yeah, well, all I have to say about whenever a player requests a trade is adios mio, because I know it comes down to money so much, but we'll see. Hopefully it gets. I want all players and on the teams doing their best and being ready to give everything they got. I wanted to ask, because you're wearing the Montreal Expos cap, and we talked a little bit beforehand. I wanted to who was your guy growing up on the Expos?
You broke up a little bit. I think you're asking me who was my guy growing up on the Expos.
Yes.
Oh, that's a good question. It's a great question.
Could be more than one. It's okay.
A couple of them. Oh, I can tell you, I love Tim Raines. Love Tim Raines. If I say Vlad Guerrero was my favorite all-time Expo, but that was more. I was a little bit older then. Growing up, I liked Steve Rogers a lot, even though he did give up that crushing home run, that Blue Monday game against the Dodgers in the 1981 playoffs. But he was still a great pitcher. I'll give you a very obscure name, and if you have to be a major baseball, I hate to use the term baseball nerd, but you have to really know your baseball to know this guy, David Palmer.
Oh, yes.
Was a pitcher who had a nasty, nasty cutter, I think it was, or man, he was so good, but he blew out his elbow because of what he threw, and I think, and his career was derailed. But those were some of the guys. Gary Carter, obviously. Ellis Valentine, I thought, was just an insanely talented player with one of the top 3 arms I've ever seen in my life. Yeah, but those are some of the guys that stand out.
Oh, that's awesome.
But I appreciate the question. I love talking Expos.
Oh, yeah. And David Palmer, I do remember him having some just absolutely incredible games against the Dodgers. For me growing up, and I was just like, and then, yeah, I remember, I hate seeing players get hurt. And, it was just, when he got hurt, I thought, ooh, that's bad. Yeah. Too bad. And I do remember Steve Rogers. I wasn't even gonna say anything about the 81 that Blue Monday home run. So because I so appreciate you doing this. Last one, it's a fun one. I know you're in South Florida, and the Cuban food is more plentiful down there, but I would imagine that there's some Mexican restaurants that sneak in around there. What are some of your favorite types of tacos? Or Mexican food in general, or any Mexican food in general.
Guess I like a good burrito. Would be probably my answer. Yeah, I think that would be the one. I'm not a Mexican food connoisseur. I will tell you, there used to be a restaurant chain down here. I don't believe it exists anymore, but I used to love the Taco Viva Supreme Sampler it was called, that I really, really enjoyed back in the day.
What were some of the meats that they had on the?
Oh, I couldn't tell you, but it was a burrito, an enchilada, refried beans, and it had a taco, a whole bunch of different things.
Oh man. Well, I know that I've seen Cubano food in tacos, so it all works. It all works. Put a tortilla on anything. Heck, growing up, we even put tortillas on hot dogs. So, or, you know, a
There you
little
go.
hot dog taco.
Yeah,
uh,
we have egg burritos at the house all the time.
oh, yum. Yum, yum, yum. Oh, it's dinner time out here. I know it's a little bit later than dinner time out there, but Alan, esto fue un gran placer. I wish I could say it in French, but definitely this was just a great time. I always love talking a little bit of old school baseball. I don't like to use the word old in there, but obviously being able to run down and hear about one of my favorite players of all time in Dan Marino, and one of the franchises I followed so much. So thank you. This was great, great time, un gran éxito. I wanted to say, feel free, let our Familia community know where they can follow you. Obviously, your Twitter handle is right there, but we're also going to release this on audio, so feel free everywhere they can find your work.
Well, unfortunately, I'm kind of concentrated in one area. This is where they can follow my work, and also on my website, which is alldolphins.com or si.com/NFL/Dolphins.
And how about your Twitter handle?
It's right there.
For our audio audience.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. It's my name, Poupart NFL. It's spelled Poupart
Oh man,
Poupart NFL, just like it sounds.
Oh well, I mean, again, thank you so much, everybody. Familia, eso es todo for our show. Thanks again to Anchor and to YouTube for being our hosting networks for our audience, for both our audio and our video audience. Please make sure to subscribe wherever you can, and also you can find original content at familiaffb.com. You can find my Twitter at Jorge Martin 17, also our Twitter and Instagram at familiaffb, and our Familia FFB Facebook page. Otra vez, Alan, thank you so much, and everybody, remember, todos somos familia. Salud.